headset, and that's going to be part of the Christmas fun.
Now, it is a kind of funny thing to me that people, we're going to loosely characterize them as being on the right, sort of pro-freedom of speech, small government kind of people. They tend to, or we tend to, freak out about things that statistically are occurring and are disastrous. And, of course, all of that is poo-pooed by the left as, paranoia and conspiracy theory crap and all that. But on the left, they seem to freak out about things that don't strike me as particularly important at all. That seems like a pretty big bridge to try and cross between these two cultures.
No, I mean, I'm still getting emails from disabled people, from Muslims who are freaking out, and they still actually think that Donald Trump will put them in concentration camps. And of course, the reason for that is the real fake news, the mainstream media that has created this hysterical narrative over the past 12 to 18 months about Donald Trump based on absolutely no evidence whatsoever. We still get LGBT people, again, freaking out that they're going to be put in labor gulags by Donald Trump because of this narrative, despite the fact that he's been the most LGBT-friendly presidential candidate, Republican at least, in history. So it's complete hysteria, and they're still pushing it to this day. It's all part of, what we're going to continue to see up until January 20th and probably beyond, which is Trump derangement syndrome. Everything that's happened in the aftermath of the vote has been Trump derangement syndrome. And that's why I actually think there will be at some point another attempt on Donald Trump's life, unfortunately. That was one of the most underreported stories of the year when I think it was Michael Sanford was his name, this British citizen, tried to grab a gun at a Donald Trump rally and tried to shoot Donald Trump. Completely buried by the media. He's just been charged. He only got 7 years in prison. But again, he was radicalized by the hysterical narrative of the mainstream media that Donald Trump was, literally Hitler and all this kind of propaganda. So unfortunately, that's going to continue at least up until January 20th. And, that's why Donald Trump wears a bulletproof jacket, because he gets death threats like no one else in political history. And it's because of this hysterical agenda that the media is pushing every day.
Well, that's funny because Bill Gates went to Trump Tower and came out saying that he thought that Donald Trump was, he compared him to JFK. And my first thought was, I hope that's not the same ending, because that was not particularly good. That was the last guy who tried to take on the Fed, right?
No, I mean, it's been a concern of ours for many months. We've written articles, done videos about it. And again, it all goes back to the fact that the left this year, 2016, has lost the argument on pretty much everything. So now they're starting to resort to, having exhausted all their other options, they're resorting to censorship. And we see this with the whole Russian hacking propaganda, completely baseless, no new evidence whatsoever. There was a poll yesterday found that 59% of the American public don't believe that mainstream media contrived conspiracy theory. So everything they throw at this is not working. So they're resorting to censorship, which we now see with YouTube cutting people's views in half. People who try to make serious content are being discouraged from making videos in favor of mindless, advertiser-friendly content. We see it with Twitter banning people. Leftists now think that disagreeing with them on Twitter or tagging them in a tweet is harassment. People are being banned for that. Now we've got Facebook with the Ministry of Truth literally recruiting Snopes as this independent, impartial arbiter of what constitutes fake news, when it's literally one of the most far-left bias websites imaginable, which I wrote about. And this is going to be a problem going forward. They can't beat us when it comes to the argument, so they're going to have to figuratively put gaffer tape over our mouths and try and silence us that way.
Oh, this fake news thing is it's not too shocking. I mean, this was going to happen whether Trump won or not. I think that the alternative media is far better positioned because of the Trump victory. But the leftists, of course, they may be corrupt, but they're not dumb. And they knew, of course, that it was alternative media outlets that did a lot to undermine their chances of getting Hillary into the White House. And rather than take us on in the realm of ideas, with debates, with arguments and so on, this idea to just sort of, two wet fingers together on the candle of intelligence and just snuff it out is kind of inevitable. I do think it's going to backfire. I think that it's too far down the road, and I think people are going to say, oh, this place is fake news? How interesting. Let me go and check it out. And I think it's going to be a bit of a Streisand effect, but of course that remains to be seen.
Well, I mean, it's different battlefronts, isn't it? Some of this censorship is going to be easier to combat than other forms of it because, if Twitter wipes out your account, that's it. You're not getting back. I mean, look at what happened to Milo. But as you said, they're going to have the Streisand effect. Of course, the irony about this is that the Washington Post is one of the organizations tasked by Facebook with overseeing this Ministry of Truth, this fake news police. The Washington Post's supposed Russian propaganda fake news list, the one they put out a couple of weeks ago, was completely exposed and eviscerated as basically being pulled out of thin air by the shadowy neocon group. The Washington Post itself had to back away from the fake news list that they put in front of everyone and base their entire story on, saying that they couldn't vouch for its validity. So that was completely debunked. The first fake news list they put out was from this far left social justice warrior feminist professor. The media all picked up on that, again, without question. So again, it's the fake news. There are fake news websites, Stefan. I was bitching about fake news websites 5 years ago when it was, Source Fall and insiders in the Kremlin say this. It was obviously just made up, and we were talking about that. We were saying don't trust these sources. But there's a difference between people who deliberately put out fake news to make advertising dollars and people who have a conservative opinion. And yes, we don't get things right all the time. We cover a lot of stories, but we're not deliberately putting out fake news, unlike the mainstream media with, fake explanations for a YouTube video being responsible for the Benghazi attack, weapons of mass destruction, hands up, don't shoot, the fake narrative that caused an uprising against the police, dead police in, Baton Rouge and Dallas and so on. But obviously, they're going to do guilt by association. They're going to say these fake news websites are harming journalism, lump us in with them to silence their competition because we're kicking their ass.
And does that ever work? I mean, outside of a purely totalitarian regime, I can't think of a time where unjust attacks upon the integrity of others does anything other than discredit the attacker. And that, of course, is my hope. I've been enormously impressed this last year by the wisdom of the crowd. There's always this idea that the more people you get together, the lower the IQ tends to get. But in the reach that you've had, the reach that I've had, and many other people have had, I have found a shocking, or at least to me, very surprising amount of wisdom and intelligence and skepticism of the media and skepticism of authority in the masses, and that has been a really beautiful thing to see.
No, I mean, for me, whenever I get recognized, it's always people who are even younger than me. It's kids in college and university, basically. So not only are we winning, we're reaching younger and younger people. I mean, the start of this year, I started out with, I think it was around 10 million Twitter impressions a month. At the height of it, about a month ago, it was 260 million Twitter impressions a month. You compare that to someone like the BBC, which has 27 million followers on Twitter. You go and look at their amount of retweets. I get double the amount of retweets compared to the BBC. And I mean, that has got to frighten them. You've got the New York Times just coming out today and saying they're going to have to clear out, I think it's 8 floors of their building and rent them out. Because, again, they're cratering. This whole lie about, we're selling so many subscriptions, it's so brilliant. Again, proven completely fraudulent. They're dying. They're in trouble. And that's why they're lashing out. That's why they're having to partner with the likes of Facebook, YouTube, and Twitter, because the empire is going to strike back. And it's still this idea of there's a total lack of introspection on behalf of the mainstream media. They're still spinning this yarn that they didn't win the election because everyone was racist, because the Russians hacked it, the Russians controlled everything, this massive conspiracy theory they've been floating. They tried to have a recount, Jill Stein, that completely failed. There's a total lack of introspection. They're not listening to people like Bernie Sanders who are saying, look, identity politics doesn't work. Calling all your ideological adversaries bigots, misogynists, sexists, Islamophobes doesn't work. Let's look in the mirror and see how we can get this back. They're not doing that. Still, what are we now? More than a month after the election, they're still on this same narrative. And it's like getting up every day, Stefan, and saying, this old narrative yet again. It's like you talk about, you have to combat the ideology of communism and explain to everyone why it has failed throughout history and always will. Kind of every 10 years or so, you have to make that argument. Now it seems every single day we have to make the argument why Donald Trump won the election, and it's not because of why the mainstream media is saying, and they still don't get that. So now they're turning to censorship, but as he said, it's never worked in the past, and it won't work again.
Yeah, it only works if you escalate to like North Korean style censorship. And that, of course, is not about to happen in the West. And we're going to do everything we can to prevent that kind of escalation, because the free market of ideas is where the best ideas come to play and to be refined. And I genuinely do believe that if it wasn't for I hate to use the phrase alternative media, because it sounds like there's this, this main line of the train station, and then there's this kind of weird one off in the field somewhere. It's the unfettered media, it's the listener-focused media, it's the uncontrolled media. But I think that did have a huge sway in things like Brexit. I think it's going to have a huge sway in what goes on with Marine Le Pen in France and in Italy and so on, and of course with Donald Trump and the powers that be. They see the disruption of easy to access, uncontrolled conversations, and a true meritocracy. Like, the internet is a true meritocracy. It's whether you can make good ideas, it's whether you can put them forward in a way that is enjoyable for people. This is where the real meritocracy is, and all of the fenced in, controlled, and shielded from the marketplace kind of media, I think it's kind of freaking out, knowing that there's a bustle of ideas outside their gates that they really can't join in at the moment.
No, precisely. And I mean, I see it on my own Twitter when every day mainstream journalists, a new form of virtue signaling for them is to highlight and respond to my tweets. That never happened in the past. They just ignored us. Now they feel the need to respond to us as kind of a virtue signaling mechanism, but also to attract all these other mainstream media journalists to pile on and try and attack us, because it's becoming harder and harder for them to hold their narrative together. So they're having to coordinate more and more, which is what you saw with the WikiLeaks emails. Dozens and dozens of journalists literally going to John Podesta's house for dinner, because that level of cronyism, that level of coordination needs to get deeper and deeper for them to maintain the same narrative, because simply they just don't have the audience that they used to have. And we see that across every sector. But as he said, in 2017, the battle, for me, definitely will move on to Europe. We've got a French presidential election in April. We've got one in the Netherlands coming up in March. Geert Wilders looks like he's in a good position. He's leading, according to the recent polls, in the Netherlands. In France, you've got Marine Le Pen, of course. They basically selected a faux conservative to go up against her to try and sink her in Francois Fillon. I've watched 10-minute videos of him waffling on about Islam and how dangerous it is. Yet he doesn't have a single policy, what he's going to do about it, what he's going to do about the migrant influx, what he's going to do about the fact that Paris is now virtually an open-air migrant camp. But the recent polls show that he's ahead of Le Pen, so that's going to be a battle in France. You've got a German election in September where Merkel at the moment still has 59% of the support. So again, that's going to be another battle. Sweden is a little bit later in 2018, but the Sweden Democrats are now level as the second place party in Sweden. So from Brexit to Trump to Italy, now the battleground for me will focus on the Netherlands, France and Germany.
I wonder, this phrase of the special snowflakes, or the people who can't handle criticism, or the people who view disagreement as harassment and need a safe space whenever they encounter an opinion that hasn't been sanctioned by their elders. I wonder if, growing up with a very sort of safe and secure and perhaps a little bit too bubble wrapped of a childhood, where, you can't fail and everyone gets a prize and there's a participation trophies and so on. I wonder if that has just made people very fragile, if in a sense being overprotective of your children is part of what is undermining the robustness of the West as a whole.
No, I would completely less than it is now. Go out and roam free for hours and hours. I had basically autonomy when I was a child. My parents weren't that worried about me. They would let me go off and do what I wanted. Now you've got children literally on leashes, literally on leashes. I live in an apartment block where they don't let their kids leave the tiny little garden that's in front of the apartment block for fear of what would happen. So yeah, there is that bubble wrap mentality. Also, there's this idea that, the lowest common denominator, everyone gets a trophy mindset, and that is harming young people. And that is manifested in things like the fat pride movement. You know, this idea that being lazy and entitled and making terrible lifestyle choices should not only be respected, but they should make you respect it. I mean, criticizing it is a hate crime. So that's what I'm going to shift into. You know, we've won the argument politically for the time being. Now we have to start winning again in the culture war. We have to make conservatism the new counterculture, because the current culture that we've got, the sewer pipe Hollywood culture, celebrates vulgarity. It celebrates conformity. You know, it denigrates true beauty and talent. Whether you're talking about music, art, fashion, or whatever. Two of the most popular videos that I made this year were about popular music and modern art, because people are hungry for that. They're hungry for an alternative narrative, because, again, what they're being fed on a consistent basis through the Hollywood sewer pipe, through the music industry, through modern art, is vulgarity. It's poison. People are thirsty for an alternative to that, and that's one of, I mean, I guess Trump is starting off on that, in that direction with his alliance with Kanye West. You know, Andrew Breitbart said that politics is downstream from culture. That's what I'm going to shift into, at least to some extent, in 2017, is trying to make conservatism, trying to make true art, true music that has actual talent and beauty at the forefront, and make it accessible to young people, because what they're being fed at the moment, as I say, is vulgarity and conformity. That is what is exalted in the entertainment industry on a regular basis.
Oh, yes, and of course we know from the Weimar experiment where extreme decadence and degeneracy in art can lead, which is to a very significant backlash that, well, could be described as a significant overreach in terms of dealing with the problem. So I really wanted to say, of course, thanks for your time today, Paul. Thanks for your time before on this show. It's always been a great pleasure to chat. Really want to wish you, it seems very sad, have a nice day off. Have a nice day off. Good luck unplugging.